Thank you very much, Senator Rosen and Chair McCormick. Thank you both for holding this hearing, and thank you to each of our witnesses for testifying. I think it's fair to say that there's general bipartisan agreement on this committee, and I think probably in Congress, that a stable Syria is in the best interests of the United States. So as you're thinking about what we should be doing in Syria, what are the resources that are needed to bring greater stability there, and what security guarantees are needed and that the United States could be helpful with? And I will throw it open to whoever would like to answer.
Syria also is at a pivotal moment, coming out of war, but with a very fragile government and society. And I think there are a number of steps that we should be taking now that Syria's met the criteria to lift sanctions on them. They're not perfect, but it's important that Syria succeed. The first is stability and mediation among various sectoral groups. The U.S. was very effective in solving sectoral disputes in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. I think that's one of the keys to their stability in the long term, working between the KDP and PUK. In Syria, we have an opportunity to help Syria become a united country as well. The next is a recovery strategy. There's been a tremendous amount of physical infrastructure destruction, social destruction, public services. 2.4 million children are out of school. A quarter of housing is damaged or destroyed. This will not be rebuilt on its own without financing, accountability, and a lot of coordination. So having a strong recovery strategy that looks broadly at infrastructure, social services, the economy, et cetera, is key. The third, I'll give four. The third is working on refugee return. What we've learned from studies globally is that the vast majority of refugees never return. And I think if we want to see something different in Syria with returns, something different will need to happen. And that will require enabling conditions in Syria so that refugees can return and find stability and education and jobs. And then finally, Al-Hol and Roj and the ISIS prisons are a remaining sore spot in the northeast. Some 9,000 fighters are in prison, probably likely will be incarcerated for a long time, if not in perpetuity. But there are 40,000 family members, the women and children. Right. Many of the women are criminals also, but the children are not getting adequate education, and having growing up in that environment is a long-term risk to them as well as to future radicalization issues. So those are the four steps that I'd recommend.
I'm surprised you didn't mention lifting of sanctions. Did I miss that?
No, the sanctions lifting that happened last week, and then or a month ago or so, as well as other steps to do so.
But I think that there has been rhetoric about lifting the sanctions, but the actual implementation of that is ongoing. So how important do you think that is?
I think it's crucial. Syria is not going to recover without funds. They need to rebuild buildings, and that costs money, and that money has to go through banks. And in order to give Syria a chance at not devolving into chaos again, there needs to be funding flowing into it, but done in ways that manage accountability so that it's being spent as intended.
And how challenging is the continued bombing from Israel into Syria in terms of preventing the ability of the country to come together?
I think all of the violence, the intersectoral violence with neighboring countries, et cetera, is putting Syria in a very delicate spot. It could devolve back into civil war and stay that way for a long time, or it could weather it and go forward. And I think a lot of that depends on U.S. leadership in making sure that some of these conditions are in place, including internal stability, relations with neighbors, recovery, and helping the refugees return.
Thank you. Last week, the minority on this committee released this report on China, The Price of Retreat, and it addresses policies that have been put in place since the Trump administration came into office at the beginning of the year. And it talks about ceding ground to China. In the Middle East, we know that Huawei is developing 5G networks in Kuwait, Egypt, and that China has held its first ever joint military drills over Egyptian pyramids. It also serves as an intermediary for dual-use products used by Houthis for their drones. So what does China want in the Middle East? Again, Ambassador Shapiro.
Sure. Thank you, Senator. China clearly wants to establish influence, both economic but increasingly also military footprint and relationships. And so it's one of the reasons ensuring that we remain the security partner of choice for our partners in the region is critical. When we've been negotiating over the last couple administrations the possibility of normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel, the Saudis have come to us and said we'd like a security guarantee from the United States, which I think is reasonable to grant, but it must be coupled with clear limitations on Saudi-Chinese military cooperation. That I think would not just help us with the Saudis, but it would actually set a frame for others in the Gulf, and that should be critical. Now, we also have these other presences. We have a small presence in Iraq, small presence in Syria. Those support partners like the Kurds, obviously help continue the counter-ISIS mission. If we were to precipitously remove ourselves from all those areas, it would raise a lot of questions in the minds of various partners, and the Chinese would certainly be looking for opportunities to show, maybe not initially militarily, but economically or with cultural or other kinds of programming, that they are an alternative to us. That's something that is very dangerous for our interests.
Well, thank you. I recommend the report to each of you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking.